Hello and welcome. You're watching the Ideas Factory with me, Naghma, and Professor Harsh Pant. What was the impact strategically, geopolitically of this AI summit?
It is not going to be easy. AI governance through multilateralism looks very difficult to accomplish given the fractured nature of the global order.
And India hosted two world leaders, the French President Macron and President Lula da Silva, who represent two very different faces of global power. Trump is almost in a confrontation with the Supreme Court. What is happening? Is he really heads on with the Supreme Court?
He has always been very turbulent, but I think this has added another layer of uncertainty to an already very turbulent policy making in this White House.
Now, this 18% tariff, if we talk about India, will it resolve some of the problems or the disadvantages that India was facing in the region?
There was a lot of concern that Mr. Trump is known to go back on his words, that he keeps on bringing in new conditionalities even after signing an agreement or even after agreeing to certain terms and conditions.
This Pakistan-Afghanistan clashes, how will this play out in the region?
If the Taliban decide to take action, to retaliate, it would not be easy for Pakistani military to hold back.
Now let's move to the India-EU deal, which is called the mother of all deals. Hello and welcome. You're watching the Ideas Factory with me, Naghma, and Professor Harsh Pant. And there is a lot that has happened around the world. It is the India-EU trade deal and the India-US trade deal, Bangladesh's new election, the new prime minister. But we would want to start, Harsh, with what is happening in the US first on the domestic front, and then we look at the India-US. Trump is almost in a confrontation with the Supreme Court. He's belligerent as far as his tariffs are concerned, and it's also his stance on Iran. So he seems to be in a confrontation with the Supreme Court. And the question arises that where does he go from this? What is happening? Is he really heads on with the Supreme Court?
I think Mr. Trump is facing multiple challenges at home, and the confrontation with the Supreme Court on the issue of tariffs is one manifestation of that challenge that he's facing. He has delivered a very combative State of the Union address in which he has laid out an agenda where he's saying, which seems to be implying that he's not going back on anything that he has stood for such a long time. And I think in that there is a message about his politics and about his base that he wants to mobilize. So there is a lot of emphasis on patriotism, on trying to mobilize the nationalistic impulses in the country. And it was, in some ways, he has to do it because he is not very popular. His approval ratings are quite low, one of the lowest for any sitting president at this point. And his economic agenda is not cutting ice with a large part of American
But this
population.
whole nationalism and patriotism has been his core. His election campaign too focused around this. Will this work now? And with his confrontation with the Supreme Court, the question is what happens to the tariffs, and is the trade war over, or the trade war is going to take a new turn after all this?
I think he's, of course, implying, as we saw in his first reaction to the Supreme Court verdict, that he's not backing down, and that he was very angry, very annoyed that the Supreme Court took a decision. Although this is a friendly Supreme Court, a lot of their decisions in the first year have gone in favor of Mr. Trump. But this decision certainly was seen as an overreach by the Supreme Court, and therefore Supreme Court pushed back. So in some ways, what is, for many, it would seem heartening that checks and balances are still working in the American democracy. For Mr. Trump, this is a sign that an institution like Supreme Court is pushing back, and he can't have his way. So there is, I think, this is the first time that he's encountering this. So he's visibly annoyed, and he's also making life difficult for America's partners, because they don't know how to react. It's a domestic contestation that is now having an impact on American policy around the world. He, for example, when he came after the verdict, he raised it to 10%, then he raised it to 15%. 10% was what the Supreme Court said. Then he raised it to 15%. So he's almost lashing out in anger, and that he has to do something, and that he's showing that he wants to push back. How far he can push back, that remains to be seen. And he's using certain powers, legislative powers, that are quite contentious and that many experts argue do not hold much water. But whether that would be appealing to his base, that would be his main his main issue with where he goes. So I think it's a turbulent, he has always been very turbulent, but I think this has added another layer of uncertainty to an already very turbulent policy making in this White House. And for others, including India, this is also a moment to reflect as to where should they go, because ultimately, if there is no domestic consensus among major institutions in the country about as critical an issue as tariff policy, then for external interlocutors, it becomes very difficult to engage. And I think that is where most of the world finds itself in.
So is it right now everything is on a hold? Because first, this domestic problem has to take care of itself. That is how, like you say, that it is a problem for the other countries. And how do we go forward with America? And in that case, as far as the tariff war is concerned, now this 18% tariff, if we talk about India, will it resolve some of the problems or the disadvantages that India was facing in the region vis-a-vis other countries like be it Bangladesh or the other neighborhood? India was facing a higher tariff. So now with the Supreme Court rulings and the tariffs coming down, how does it really affect India? Is it like good news for India? Does that really work for India?
I think in theory, when the Supreme Court struck down the tariff regime of Mr. Trump, that would have been good news for any country, including India. I think for India, of course, because the tariffs would have come down further. But I think the uncertainty that's still there in the system is bad news for any country, because policies are based on certain stability and predictability that you want from your partner. And I think in this particular case, the framework agreement which India and the US had negotiated was to induce that predictability in the relationship. And I think now that Supreme Court has come back, you are back to square one in terms of an already very volatile administration. Now you have the Supreme Court coming in and saying, look, you can't do this or you can't do that. So there is enormous unpredictability now for India and how and for other countries. So I think it will be a wait and watch mode for a lot of countries, including India, insofar as where and how the situation in the domestic system evolves.
Of course. So we can't say now that the Supreme Court has blocked Trump's tariffs, the trade war is over.
No. Not at all. I think Mr. Trump is fighting back, and in the process, he has indicated that he will continue to be as volatile and unpredictable, and that is not good news for any of America's partners, because you will be constantly on tenterhooks as to what is coming next. Already this was the case even when there was a framework agreement, because there was a lot of concern that Mr. Trump is known to go back on his words, that he keeps on bringing in new conditionalities even after signing an agreement or even after agreeing to certain terms and conditions. So you can imagine the unpredictability now where Supreme Court is also now is pushing in and is making it clear that certain things are outside his bounds, but Mr. Trump is unwilling to relent.
He's unwilling to relent, and there's a lot of unpredictability as far as the US-India trade deal is concerned. Now, other than the unpredictability there on the domestic front and the problems there was also many questions about the US-India trade deal that here in India people were asking. And just to understand that, the whole thing that it is India bowing to US sanctions, because also, like you said, Trump is very unpredictable. He goes back on words. There are too many conditionalities. So that, and how is this trade deal really helping India? How do we understand this trade deal with America?
See, I think two things. One is that where we were before the framework agreement and where we came after the agreement. Certainly, it's a long road, and it's a road that is, and it's a trajectory that is largely positive, because you don't want to be in a position where you don't have any framework agreement with your partner, and particularly with the US, with whom there are significant equities on the table. So I think from a slightly chaotic situation to, or a seriously chaotic situation, to one where at least something was on the table. Both sides were aware of what the other side was offering, what is and how to move forward. I think that was an achievement, because it's not very easy to engage and to come to an agreement with Mr. Trump, particularly for a country like India, where there are certain red lines like agriculture and dairy.
There have been many questions on that.
Yes.
That has India actually bowed down to the US conditionalities, and secondly about the buying of Russian oil.
Yes, and exactly, and the issue, because the issues were linked There were interlinkages insofar as energy was concerned, insofar as what will India buy from US was concerned. So I think there was what the framework agreement did, and I think that's where perhaps it was good news that it took India-US from a position of enormous ambiguity to one where there was manageable ambiguity.
Okay.
That, because certain things were ambiguous, as we are discussing. It was ambiguous as to what India, 500 billion over 5 years. That was one thing that India, that was mentioned that India will buy. Now, it was kept ambiguous, and I think it helped India to be ambiguous in that sense, because that ambiguity allowed certain strategic space where which India could maneuver. In fact, Mr. Trump would not be in office for the entirety of 5 years. So you could manage that. Then I think this idea that India is going to, what India is going to do on energy. Now, of course, the Russia question is front and center. But Russia question has to be seen in the context where our increase from Russia in terms of oil imports started post-Ukraine. If you go before Ukraine, India was hardly buying anything from Russia. Because post-Ukraine, the global situation became what it was, energy market became what it was, and Russia started offering India discounts. It allowed India to ramp up imports from Russia. So therefore, it looked a very steep rise. Now, today the question is, are we still buying the cheapest or the most economical option from the market? That's the question India has to ask.
But isn't that what India should decide? India should decide,
yes.
Not that someone else is telling India to do that. Or Trump puts a condition that you have to buy oil from Venezuela and America more than you buy from Russia. Will India be accepting that? The question is...
No, I think they... See, again, I would say that there is enough ambiguity in the system. If Mr. Trump is saying that, look, you have to reduce your dependence on Russia.
On the Russian oil.
And I think that is something that India already was doing, because our private sector was not willing to buy from Russia, given that there were sanctions that were imposed on Russian entities. So you can imagine why Indian private sector being reluctant to expose itself to American sanctions, given that the private sector is also engaged with the Americans. So they will make that cost benefit calculus. But Indian state engagement with Russia has not declined. That is not something that India is willing to acquiesce to. So I think there are two different aspects to this. Now, whether Mr. Trump can decide on what India is doing, of course not. But I think there is also a question of, in a negotiation, what is given and what is taken. And I think give and take is what actually this negotiation should have been all about. Now, from framework agreement to an actual agreement, if the process would have moved along the predictable lines, we would perhaps have known in a few weeks' time what exactly are the contours of that engagement, because that framework agreement is largely a very broad set of positions that the two countries have agreed to. But what concrete India has agreed to, or what concretely America has asked India to do, that would have become clear only after the final agreement.
So right now it's not clear. And so that's why when the criticism or the other political parties here, politically, the questions are being asked on what has India agreed to, the entire format is not really clear. And as you put it, we've just moved to a manageable ambiguity. So we're really not clear on what have we agreed to or what is the give and take. Right?
Absolutely. I don't think there is any... clarity on that.
Yeah.
And I think now that after Supreme Court verdict, there is further challenge to whether India and America can come to some sort of an understanding. Now, you look at how Mr. Trump is so annoyed that he's also, firing at America's partner, saying that, look, I will take action against those countries who will play, who are trying to make the most of this domestic issue in India, in the US. But that is something that every country will do, because they will wait and watch. If the domestic situation unravels, then it makes it imperative for other countries, in their interest, to wait and see how the dice is
This is
rolled.
what the world is doing right now, just waiting and watching while Trump is at loggerheads with the Supreme Court, and there is a bigger domestic problem for him at hand, and he's again resorting to nationalism and patriotism to probably improve his ratings, which is at an all-time low, like you said. But now let's move to the India-EU deal, which is called the mother of all deals. And that again is unraveling it's unraveling a shift, a new geopolitical order, also because European Union has been so wary of now what America was doing or America's policies that it can no longer depend on America as a trusted ally, right? So in that context, India-EU trade deal, what does it offer to India? How does it change situations around the world?
I think it's one of the most significant deals to have happened, and a significant moment in India-EU relationship. After almost 2 decades of negotiating
Yes.
this arrangement, finally the two sides decided, and I think that both sides have to thank Mr. Trump for it, partly.
He kind of pushed us there.
He accelerated the process that was already beginning to happen. India and the EU were converging. They were working together very, very closely. We know that despite differences over Ukraine, both sides did not give up on each other. So we have seen the relationship grow despite challenges. But I think what EU and India realized that both offer each other exactly what Mr. Trump is no longer offering: predictability, stability, less volatility. And that convergence is very significant, because in a world where Mr. Trump is appending so many of the assumptions, some degree of a partnership like India-EU, where there is an inherent predictability, inherent stability, becomes very important. And that is what we have seen happen with this relationship. So while I think it's fair to say that both sides would have come to this agreement despite Mr. Trump, I think Mr. Trump accelerated that process. He ensured that the two sides continue to, India and the EU, that is, continue to engage each other more substantively and reach a conclusion much faster than they would have otherwise done. And in that sense, I think this treaty almost relaunches India-EU relationship. Because, we have always talked of this relationship as one that is below potential. Now I think we are recognizing, both sides are recognizing what the potential can be and how to reach that potential. So when on the one hand you have the FTA with the EU, on the other you have the defense partnership with EU, which is growing and which was again part of the deal, along with the mobility pact. So there are multiple areas, multiple convergences that are now bringing the two together. It is not simply the strategic dimension, it is also the people-to-people dimension, it is also the strategic dimension, and it is also the economic dimension. So a very holistic approach to bilateral relationship. And unlike the transactional approach that Washington has shown under Mr. Trump, that's the difference. And I think that's what makes this deal important. And in some ways, India-EU coming to an agreement would also have been a factor in the framework agreement coming so soon after the India-EU agreement. Because there was a bit of a reluctance between Washington and Delhi. But once the mother of all deals was completed, there was also the reality of India-US framework agreement coming to the fore.
Absolutely. And, like you said, the India-European Union trade deal took place because Trump kind of also accelerated it. It was supposed to happen, but the talks were on for a long time. Does that also in some way, slow down the entire process, or America's, when he says the Trump corollary and taking control over the entire Western Hemisphere, American hegemony, so that march towards American hegemony over the Western world and his Greenland ambition and everything else that he's been talking about, does that slow down that process too?
I think it shows that that America's allies like Europe and America's partners like India will continue to look elsewhere for partnerships, for strengthening their capacities, for strengthening for ensuring that certain global public goods are provided. And that is, I think, the message that the world is increasingly sending to Mr. Trump, that we are not beholden, or we can't be beholden only to Washington. So you see this, EU's approach to India. You see individual countries that are part of the Western Alliance now reaching out to China. We have seen British Prime Minister, Canadian Prime Minister, now German Prime Minister making beeline to China. In a sense, also indicating that partnerships elsewhere will also evolve.
Yeah. Absolutely. So there are new power centers, new partnerships, and new alliances. The world is not clearly waiting just for Trump to breathe
Yes,
again.
there's too much chaos emanating from Washington at this point.
Yeah.
You can only wait so
You
long
can
to
only-
for America to put its own house
So
in
new
order.
alliances are taking place. And now let's move on to what happened in New Delhi, the AI Impact Summit that India hosted. And in a very fractured world right now, it created quite a stir because big world leaders were here, and the French president was here, the Brazilian president were here, probably in the same week, one after the other. And it also showed how India is going in for a strategic reset, right? What was the impact strategically, geopolitically of this AI summit?
I think two things. One, it positioned India as a critical voice, which is not simply talking about itself, but also the larger global south. And I think that's something that India has taken forward through G20 all the way till today, where this the sense that for those countries that are not part of global governance discourse, India will amplify their voice. So I think in that sense, the entire AI discourse is also has pivoted around that you are no longer looking simply at major powers like US model, Western model, China model, EU model. You're also looking at a model where there is more democracy, inclusiveness, like India's model is, which is for the common man, common person. And I think that in some ways was the message that emanated out of AI, that while India has certain capabilities which needs to be recognized, but those capabilities are embedded in the larger global south, where that if the world has to look at AI and its governance, it will have to look at the imperatives emanating from the global south. It can't.
So it was a
can't
major
just,
global south
yeah.
convening on AI governance.
Yes, and I think that was a very important message from India's side. Apart from the message that India wanted to give, that its own capabilities towards AI, that as it seeks to build them, it will keep the ordinary person at the core of that initiative, of those initiatives, because ultimately AI should benefit humanity and the common man and common woman, rather than just having capabilities that enhance inequalities which already exist in societies. So in that sense, I think bringing the conversation on AI, leveraging India's democracy to take that conversation forward has been, I think, India's approach to this question. It is not going to be easy. AI governance through multilateralism looks very difficult to accomplish given the fractured nature of the global order. But I think in some ways, this was a conversation that was needed, that should have happened much before. But India is now taking that conversation forward, because very few other countries have that capability to become that kind of a bridge in some ways between the global south, global north, east, west, whichever binary you may want to use.
And India hosted two world leaders, right? The French President Macron and President Lula da Silva, who represent two very different faces of global power. What does that really, what was the strategy behind that? Where was India trying to position itself by hosting these two world leaders in the same week? It also shows India's diplomatic ambition. France brings that the technological advancement and that power, but also Brazil has that demographic capability. So India's positioning, what can we see?
I think this was a classic global south, global north moment for India, that you have two big countries from two very different geographies, both trying to have very strong relations with India. With France, of course, historically, we have had excellent ties, and France has been one of the strongest champions. In fact, the AI summit is co-hosted with France. With Brazil, it's a relationship that is now becoming strategic. Brazil for a long time, Latin America was seen as very distant. Now I think that there is a recognition that both Brazil needs India, India needs Brazil, what is happening in Brazil's backyard with Washington. And for India, looking at Latin America as a continent where there are enormous opportunities, economic and strategic, and how that can be leveraged in terms of defense, critical minerals, rare earth, all of these issues which are now at the moment top of the agenda when it comes to global diplomacy are embedded in India-Brazil relationship and larger India-Latin America relationship.
Of course. So, I want to move on to the Bangladesh issue. Bangladesh has seen a landslide. BNP saw a landslide win. And in a way, it was a very heavily contested election. After this, now the whole question also for India is, or for Bangladesh, is that will it redraw that regional alignment now that there is a new party in power? And what is now, Bangladesh's future? What does it really look like? And India's partnership with Bangladesh, how will that change?
I think Bangladesh's new government has a lot of challenges ahead, and most important being reviving the democratic instinct in the country and resetting the terms of engagement with India. At the end of the day, whatever you say, India and Bangladesh are for each other the most important neighbors. And their relationship will have to be at the core of Bangladesh's foreign policy outreach after this, because the relationship went through a very, very rough patch under the caretaker administration of Mohammad Yunus. And now that the relationship has to be rebuilt, it would be important to see where how the convergences can be leveraged.
Do you think it will be very different from the Sheikh Hasina era? Will there be a paradigm shift as far as the foreign policy orientation is concerned?
I don't know if we can call it paradigm shift is a more serious word to use, because ultimately we are geographically, the geography has not changed. And BNP has been in power in the past. They know what the constraints of governance are and what the realities of governance are. So, and therefore, I think BNP has throughout the campaign been very measured also in their criticism of India or criticism of the larger foreign policy. I think broadly the attempt would be to bring the relationship back to track so that day-to-day normal conversations can happen, which had disappeared under Mohammad Yunus. And I think once your day-to-day governance, once day-to-day diplomacy starts to operate, with the kind of people-to-people cultural and economic ties that we have, it would not take much time to rebuild the momentum in the relationship, because after all, his own priority or BNP's priority would also be to rebuild the economy. The most important thing would be to rebuild the economy, and in order to rebuild the economy, you have to leverage the economies, the big economies that are your neighbors. So I think one can see a moment of reset emerge out of this, out of these elections.
We hope for a reset, because the relationship with Bangladesh really went through a very turbulent time and very violent times also in Bangladesh. Moving on to another neighbor, or the two neighbors, Pakistan and Afghanistan, and the clashes taking place there. Well, the Taliban also launching strikes, Pakistan actually launching strikes inside Afghanistan. And right now, Shehbaz Sharif has been in Qatar trying to negotiate or sort out this matter. But, it's escalating the regional tension there. And of course, India has reiterated its support for Afghanistan's integrity, Afghanistan's sovereignty. But this Pakistan-Afghanistan clashes, how will this play out in the region? Why is this happening now? What is the kind of, what's the trigger right now for the Pak Taliban and the Afghan Taliban for clashing the way they are?
I think this is one of the most serious issues hovering over the region at this point, because it can escalate at any point. If the Taliban decide to take action, to retaliate, then it would not be easy for Pakistani military to hold back, given that they have had, they have to demonstrate their capability against some country. With India, they have been, at the back foot on the military front. So I think with the Taliban, it is going to be a very serious problem that Pakistan is facing. And we know the Taliban's fighting spirit and how they fight till the very end. So in that sense, I think this is a serious moment. Now, whether there is some negotiated settlement is found or not, I think is also contingent on how far Pakistani military is able to control itself. Because Shehbaz Sharif going to Qatar trying to find a negotiated settlement is only so good as the commitment of the military and backing of the military in favor of any negotiated settlement. Because
so he would have gone because the military was probably agreeing to that negotiation.
You would hope so, but the but we have seen that in the past, when the crisis happened, the same pattern was repeated, and nothing was followed through. So I think Taliban would also ask this question, that when we had agreed to certain framework in the past, why is it being repeated? Why is our territory being violated, territorial integrity being violated? So I think those questions remain at the heart of this, and unless they are resolved in some fundamental way, we will keep on seeing this kind of crisis continue, because the relations between the two countries are what they are. They are not going to improve anytime soon. And there is a lot of, within Afghanistan, there is a lot of anger and frustration with the way Pakistan has behaved. So I think this tension is there, and the underlying tension is there.
And it has the potential to escalate anytime.
Yes.
So while Bangladesh is right now kind of settling down, and we hope that it will settle down and there'll be less violence there, another front has opened up, if I put it that way, between Afghanistan and Pakistan. And
no dearth in South Asia.
Yeah, no dearth in South Asia. So thank you so much for that conversation, Harsh. And that's all that we have time for on this episode of the Ideas Factory. Thank you for watching.